more and more started uncovering that there was absolutely no research into female athletes and their menstrual cycle. Some female coaches were just like, well, it's just an excuse. Like, I've never struggled. Ooh. I feel like I've got a lifetime of research to do in the menstrual cycle.
Oh my gosh.
There's been no concrete evidence or research that says, yes, the menstrual cycle affects performance.
Oh.
However,
Shemai Emma.
Shemai Manon.
And welcome back to What's Occurring Femme, brought to you by Rouvy, hosted by Pinarello.
And today we're joined by a very special guest, and I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, so today on the podcast we have Natalie Brown, who's done a load of research into female health and especially the menstrual cycle. And we have a lot to talk about.
We do.
Welcome to the podcast, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
Hello.
I feel like first we should go back to... no one actually spoke to me about a period in my sporting career until you came along in the very last year and was like, guys, periods, like we need to be speaking about this. And that was, I think, back in 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you did a workshop on periods. And that was the first time in my whole career
That's crazy.
that someone had spoken about a period. That is mental.
Yeah.
But so what made you go down kind of that route and do that workshop on periods?
Yeah, so I think there were a couple of things going on. That one, I'd done my PhD, and that was looking at kind of hormonal responses, but in males and females. So looking at testosterone, cortisol, and the kind of changes in that when you're doing like competition preparation or recovery. And through that journey, I was just like exploring this in female athletes, and more started uncovering that there was absolutely no research into female athletes and their menstrual cycle.
That's wild.
Yeah, it was wild. I was like contacting so many people, just like, I must be missing something. I can't find any research on this. I'm trying to explore like what's going on with these hormones alongside the menstrual cycle. Everyone just kept coming back saying, well, that information doesn't exist.
That's crazy.
Which kind of blew my mind. But then also, I suppose, started me on a bit of a journey to explore some of that. And also at the same time, I'd been working with female athletes, and we'd been exploring and thinking about like every single like 1% minor detail of performance. Yet
when there's
periods
this big elephant
were not even like mentioned ever in like a team meeting or anything. So I suppose I then started on that journey to explore it further.
What year was that in?
So that would have been end of 2018, start of 2019.
So and it's not like that is when the first kind of batch of female professional athletes came through. It's like, we have been here for a long time and no one's kind of, spoken about it or done any research. And do you think it hasn't been spoken about because there wasn't any research?
No, actually. I think there's like, within society, there's definitely like a stigma and a taboo around talking around the menstrual cycle. It's something that's seen as like secretive or embarrassing. So those conversations weren't had. And then also, I think from a research perspective, it makes it difficult to do research. So males are much easier to research. So
I wonder why.
Because they've not got the changes in hormones, it's really consistent. So it basically is easier and cheaper because
so they just thought, we'll take the easy route.
So we'll take the easy route and we won't explore what's going on in female athletes. And I suppose historically in sport, it was almost kind of male dominated, which is obviously massively shift, but still the fact in like 2019, it hadn't. I just found that kind of crazy. So went on like a bit of a mission basically to try and see how we could change that.
Definitely. And I guess to begin with, can you explain the menstrual cycle to us in very basic terms?
Yep. So if we go super basic, a menstrual cycle should be 21 to 35 days between like every bleed.
That's quite a big range.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So
I'm going to be learning a lot today, guys.
when someone says it's like a 28-day cycle, that's like an average, but it could be anything from 21 to 35 days. Day one of the menstrual cycle is day one of a period or day one of bleeding. And then you kind of go through these changes in hormones. So when you're having a period, you've got quite low hormones, and the two hormones, estrogen and progesterone, they're the kind of two reproductive hormones. You've got other hormones released from the brain that kind of control that. But estrogen and progesterone, if we're going basic. After you kind of had your period, in the lead up to like about halfway through the cycle, after about maybe 7 to 10 days, you have an increase in estrogen. And that's then what stimulates ovulation. Ovulation, again, textbook is day 14, but that could be anything from day 8 to day 21, based on the length of your cycle. So that sometimes, again, we kind of have this like ovulation is day 14. It varies quite a lot.
Oh, so when people actually track it, there's a huge range?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then after ovulation, you then get an increase in progesterone and a second increase in estrogen. And in the absence of being pregnant, both of those hormones massively drop off. And then that's what takes you back to day 1 of your period or your menstrual cycle. And I suppose the other aspect is you might have heard of like the follicular phase and the luteal phase, which is like how we can define the menstrual cycle, like splitting it up. So before ovulation, so from day 1 of a period to ovulation is the follicular phase. And then from ovulation to the end of the menstrual cycle is the luteal phase.
Obviously, you've worked with elite athletes and like you've like learned and like about the menstrual cycle alongside that. Does the menstrual cycle in their phases affect training a lot, or like how women react to like training and things like that? Like,
how they should be training?
Well, yeah, how. Like,
I mean, there are so many questions within that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just throwing it all. I didn't even know how to articulate that, but like.
So I think if we start off with kind of, does it affect like training performance across the menstrual cycle? From a purely like objective, like performance measurement, there's been no concrete evidence or research that says, yes, the menstrual cycle affects performance.
Oh.
However, research that has talked to athletes to be like, what are your experiences? How does it make you feel? There's a huge amount of evidence that shows that actually the menstrual cycle does affect performance. So sometimes it's much more perceptual, more so than maybe like physiological of what's going on. Because inevitably, I remember speaking to one athlete, she's like, well, even if it's showing my performance hasn't changed, the fact that I've got really bad stomach cramps, like I don't feel like I can perform to my best. What the kind of, I suppose, caveat in the first bit that I mentioned that performance-wise doesn't seem to change is that's when we have an average. So if you put a group of people together, on average, there's no change. Whereas if you look at that data individually, that's when we see massive variation, that for one person, their performance might be massively affected compared to another person that maybe doesn't have any symptoms related to their menstrual cycle. So they're not affecting performance. So it's only when we start looking on a really individual basis that we start seeing those changes in performance.
It is a very individual thing though, isn't it? Like if we were to discuss our periods, I'm sure they'd be like totally different in the way we feel and like leading up to it, isn't it?
Exactly. Everyone's like sensitivity experiences, it's really unique. So although we all might have some common symptoms sat here today, like our experiences, how that affects us, how we manage that, that's all going to be really different.
You said you like spoke to athletes to do research on. How willing were they to speak about this? Because obviously in the past it just hasn't really been spoken about. So was it quite easy to get information from athletes about the menstrual cycle?
It varied, but definitely some athletes were like, yeah, I'm happy talking about this. What was really interesting is even those athletes that were happy talking about the menstrual cycle to me were just like, I have never spoken to my coach about this.
Yeah, I think that's quite
so
common.
It was quite a unique position, I suppose, for me that they were comfortable talking to me. I think because I'd said I wanted to talk to you about the menstrual cycle, it almost gave that opening that maybe I was comfortable, I was confident to talk about it. But none of the athletes I spoke to had spoken to their coaches at all.
And what about the coaches?
Coaches is interesting. So after speaking to the female athletes, I actually took the approach of speaking to female coaches and practitioners to understand their experiences. And that was actually more varied because some female coaches were just like, well, it's just an excuse. Like, I've never struggled.
Ooh.
Whereas other female coaches, if they'd had like a negative experience, were much more supportive and open. So it was really interesting speaking to female coaches. And then male coaches, I think so many felt like it just wasn't their place to talk about it, which I find really interesting. You know, I look at it very much from a biological, physiological perspective. So I'm just like, you talk about so many aspects of performance and you're okay talking about heart rate and talking about, heart rate variability and like your recovery and all of those things. Actually, the menstrual cycle is still a biological process.
Do you think it's because they don't know?
I think
they just
and if they haven't been kind of educated on it, it would be solely down to them to do that research on it. Whereas,
in their minds, why would?
But then if it does make like such a big difference, why wouldn't they? If, you know, such a big thing in performance, why wouldn't they take time and do that research? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a few kind of factors that we found. So male coaches, it's not the first thing that comes to mind. Like that's not anything against them, but they've not ever managed a menstrual cycle or a period, so it's not the first thing that they kind of spring to mind. Then they're worried about making their female athlete feel uncomfortable. If they do bring up the conversation, they're like, oh, am I overstepping a mark? Am I kind of invading privacy asking about that? Because it is seen as this kind of secretive thing historically. And then the third factor is they don't feel like they've got the knowledge. So, you know, a lot of coaches say, well, if I ask about the menstrual cycle, I don't know how I'm going to respond to that because I don't know anything about it. So they've almost taken the approach of, well, if I don't ask, then I don't need to not know.
Yeah, that's true. And what is like, once you've started like digging into the research, what's one of the kind of the first big things that you sort of found out and realised and was kind of shocked at?
Yeah, so when I started, I thought, I'm going to speak to female athletes. And if they all come back and say, it doesn't really affect my performance, we don't need to explore this area further. And I suppose when I started talking to the female athletes, it was crazy how much it was affecting them in their performance. Like saying like, I miss training days, or like I'm worried about competition, or I know if I go into competition, I'm going to not perform at my best. So almost what's the point of me going? And I suppose when I started like hearing that, I was just like, how are we not supporting these female athletes? Like we are massively under supporting and underserving them from like a sports science and coaching perspective.
Is there like a point in the menstrual cycle that you should be doing this sort of training or be optimal for going into racing? Not that it's very controllable, you can't, you know, plan around these things, but are there kind of like the phases you should be changing your training?
Yeah, so there's so much about that in social media. And it's kind of like, I don't know, quite a debated question, I suppose. From my perspective, and again, it does depend on who I'm working with. Like if I've got someone that's more recreational compared to an elite athlete, that it's their job, it's like they need to perform. But generally what I try and take the approach is like, why wouldn't we try and reduce symptoms so that you can train and perform consistently rather than moving around the menstrual cycle? So rather than being like, actually, this is the time I feel rubbish, for me, I'm like, well, let's explore, why do you feel rubbish? What are the symptoms? What's then potentially causing that? And what can we put in place to try and mitigate so that you do feel like you're confident to perform? And I suppose linked with that is like, if you train differently. So one thing, like an example would be you train harder in your follicular phase. So this is kind of what has been kind of put out there from a social media perspective.
But you don't agree with?
I don't.
Controversial.
You train harder during your follicular phase, like you feel strong, so that's the time to really push, to like lift heavy, to kind of do your high intensity stuff. And then after ovulation is kind of maybe when you want to start easing back, maybe a bit more endurance based. And then the week before your period is then really chill time. So more just thinking about that's your rest week. But if you always have a rest week the week before your period, but that's when the Olympic Games falls. Like psychologically, will you feel prepped to be like, I now need to like perform at my absolute best, but I normally have a rest week this week.
So you were saying you would try and reduce the how do you try and reduce
so there's
the
like
symptoms?
So a lot of symptoms are caused by like inflammation in the body. So things like stress, diet, exercise, sleep, they're all factors that actually can massively decrease severity of symptoms. So stress, for example, can really cause increases in menstrual cramps, feelings of like mood changes, feeling anxious. So actually it's like, how do we target that and make sure those are the factors? Same with like nutrition. Like there is different ways that we know from a nutritional perspective that can reduce inflammation in the body, or different, like I don't want to just say supplements because we can actually get it from other foods, like omega-3s, for example, or curcumin, which all actually can reduce the severity of symptoms. So it's actually trying to work out when someone's got symptoms and which symptoms they are. And then like, okay, let's target that to look at how we can reduce that.
And in the research that you've done, what is like the biggest symptom that's kind of stopping female athletes?
I've actually done some research recently, which I've been kind of super interested in, because I've asked female athletes to kind of rate the symptoms that they experience, but then also rate which ones most have a negative impact on performance. So for example, menstrual cramps came up as like the most severe symptom, but actually it was like low mood and low motivation that had a greater impact on their performance. So it's been really interesting to explore the difference between actually what is the most common symptom compared to what's the one that's having the most impact on performance. What I will say is that varies a lot, like sport to sport. So one like recent bit of research I've done has been talking to elite athletes around their management strategies. So for example, one cyclist was just like bloating massively affects me. I really struggled to get into like position on my bike. Whereas a biathlete was just like, my breast pain really affects me lying in a shooting position.
Yeah, wow. You don't think about these things, do you? Yeah.
Yeah, and then, so it's all kind of, although there's some really common symptoms, I would actually say it's quite different in different sports in terms of maybe what is more like negatively impacting.
Is it different within sports, within different like sprint endurance? Like, have you researched like that aspect? Like say now you have a cycling, is it quite different between sprint athletes and endurance athletes?
At the moment, like that research just, it hasn't like delved down into like that specific. There is in terms of like looking at changes in performance across the phases. So there's some now around like strength training versus endurance training, but generally in terms of looking at what symptoms affect athletes, we're only at the stage of even like working out.
That's all still to come.
I know, that's crazy.
We're
in 2025. There's so much more to like even
unpick.
Like I feel like I've got a lifetime of research to do in the menstrual cycle.
Oh my gosh.
It must be quite motivating to know, to keep going and keep researching when it's just not out there and you're finding out all these things and all this information.
Yeah, for me it is, because I feel like I can also like help people.
Yeah.
Like yes, obviously it can help elite athletes, but also it can massively help any female that wants to be active, basically, like understanding their menstrual cycle. Or you know, a lot of my work is at the other end of the spectrum, that I go into schools and try and work with girls in schools just to keep them active, because we actually know that periods are like the number one barrier for girls being like doing PE. So for me, like trying to prevent girls dropping out of sport, like I've always loved sport. I've been like really fortunate to take part in that, but to see so many girls inactive, I think like I'd love to be able to try and change that. So,
and especially like day one of my period, I have like severe cramps, and that's all I want to do is kind of lay down and not move. But sometimes I feel like I do that and then they get worse. Is it better to like move around or like try, as you said, like try and be active? Is that a genuine thing, or have I made that up?
No, that is a genuine thing. I always say like you might not want to feel like running a marathon, but definitely like if you can move. So like even if you go for like a walk, or like maybe you do some yoga stretching that kind of releases the muscle tension around your stomach and around your back, then actually that can quite a lot of the time really reduce symptoms. And then quite a lot of the time people are then like, oh, I feel like I can do a full training session now that like they've started. I suppose the caveat there is like, that's for people that don't have an underlying medical condition. So maybe like endometriosis, there's like an underlying condition there that causes severe pain. But if there's not that, then movement can be so helpful.
We are delighted to be working with Rouvy on What's Occurring Femme, and we have a great offer for you. You can use promo code FEMMES, FEMMES, for an additional 30 days on top of the 7-day free trial.
This is applicable to new subscribers only.
Rouvy's on a mission to bring the indoors to the outdoors, connecting you with real routes from around the world to your home. And in the summer, you can utilise Rouvy to do specific training sessions or to hide from the heatwave.
Rouvy's new creator tool also allows riders to upload their favourite loops onto Rouvy. Everyone can easily convert their own video into a virtual route to ride at home. We've got some big plans with Rouvy over the next few months, so watch this space.
And remember to use the code FEMMES, FEMMES, for an extra month on us when you subscribe for the first time.
As a sprint squad, we kind of tried to change the narrative of like period. So we say like period power, because I feel so strong on my period. Like I feel like, yes, obviously I have symptoms where I am a little bit more tired, but like I've lifted some of like the heaviest weights on my life on my period and like gone the best on my bike, because obviously you like there are more red blood cells and things like that, but the side effects can affect, I guess, training and things. So yeah, for us, we're just like period power.
I love that.
But I was going to ask, so sometimes for racing, I don't know the knowledge about it or anything. We've sometimes been told you can delay your period by using medication. Is that a good thing? Like, would you recommend that, or because for me, I'm thinking I just want to keep. I don't want to mess with my period. But yeah, have you done any research on that, or do you know?
I've not done any research on that, but I suppose more from like an anecdotal working with female athletes kind of perspective is yes, like, so it'd be like taking a hormonal contraceptive pill that can help delay a period. But, and again, this is just in the handful of female athletes that I've worked with, they've never had a good experience of that because it causes a different side effect, but one that they're not used to. So at least like a period is quite, if you can kind of track and get used, if you can really track your symptoms and tune into yourself, you can kind of predict and get to know what's coming and know how to manage that. Whereas if all of a sudden you throw in something completely different that your body's not used to, like the response could be completely unknown. Like some people that might be like, this works great. Whereas I've had definitely a lot more negative experiences of female athletes coming to me say, I tried this, it was awful, what else can I do? And that's then when I suppose I've supported them. They've come to me after having tried that and been like, that didn't work at all.
I remember when I must have been like 16, 17 at the time, like just kind of got into cycling seriously, and we were all like sat down like a group of girls, and it wasn't even a coach, it was like kind of like a coach on the side came in and was like, yeah, obviously like you all have periods now, and they can get in the way of race day, so we'd recommend you like going on the pill. And I like no more really information, and I was like, okay, like I'm just gonna go get the pill now. And then that was that. And it's like, I don't know, just to go and do that, it wasn't like I was having massive problems with my period at the time, it was fine, but it just makes me think like I made that decision to go on the pill from someone who I don't really think knew what they were talking about. It was just kind of like, oh, get the periods out of the way sort of thing. But is that something that people should be doing? Or is it better to understand your body a bit more and kind of work with the period?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of factors in that. One thing that I kind of discuss is like hormonal contraception is an option, but to have a lot more of an informed choice around that. So actually, how could you manage your menstrual cycle and what would be the implications of using hormonal contraception? So one thing if we think more from an energy perspective, like females are kind of lucky that the menstrual cycle is an extra sign to kind of check in that actually you're managing your stress, you're managing your energy level as well, because it means you've got a consistent menstrual cycle. If that starts becoming irregular, it's almost a bit of an early warning sign to be like, something's not quite right here. And especially when you're putting your body under such a big load and a huge demand. So hormonal contraceptives, obviously, they mask that. So you don't have that extra sign as such. But they do have their place. And for example, if you want to avoid being pregnant, because that's going to have a massive effect on your training and performance, right?
I might do.
So does that make sense? So sometimes actually there's a real place where actually it might be a better option. However, I think too often in the past, there's not been that supporting information or that advice for people to be able to make a choice. It's almost been like, this is the only option, off you go.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like it's been used quite a lot just to like cover things up, and like, maybe if you have a problem, it's like you go to the doctors and you just get it, and that'll fix your like hormonal issues and everything like that.
Unfortunately, that's still really common. So it's really difficult because obviously like general practitioners, GPs, like they're not working in sport and they are like trained to try and like cover everything in medicine, which I don't think is like humanly possible really. But equally, so many female athletes just like, well, I went to the doctors, I've not had a period for 6 months, and now I've been put on the pill to get my period back, which actually that is the complete opposite. Like having a bleed when you're using hormonal contraception is not the same as having a period. So it's just masking that issue even further. So it's a real kind of challenge, I think. And again, it's an area which does seem to be shifting, but still a lot of work to do.
And has there been much research done into, is it REDS? Is there
Correct.
much research on that? And
so REDS is relative energy deficiency in sport. It came from previously something called the female athlete triad, which was when periods stopped as a result of high training loads. Whereas actually REDS is kind of explored further, that actually it's the low energy availability and how that can affect much more than just the menstrual cycle. So it's a full body, affects all the systems in the body. So it can affect your concentration, it can affect your cardiovascular system, your temperature regulation. It really is a full body effect. And there's a lot more research on that now in males and in females, because both sexes can experience REDS.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. How did the men know that they have it? Or is it obviously am I right in saying that their period stops when a woman has REDS?
Yeah.
And
that's one sign that potentially might happen.
It's just one?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So that's just like one sign. So there's a lot of other signs that kind of occur alongside REDS. So things like increase in injury, increase in illness, feeling like more fatigued, not feeling like you can get enough sleep to actually manage the amount of training you're doing. Sometimes the opposite of it sounds like counterintuitive really, but actually not being able to lose weight can sometimes be a sign, because your body's gone into this protective mode of I want to store anything possible. So there's a lot of other symptoms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and
alongside the menstrual cycle.
How do you end up with REDS? Is it
how do you know?
Yeah. And is it from training too hard, not eating the right things?
So it's that balance of what energy is going in and what energy is going out. And if you're in a kind of more chronic state of your energy going out is greater than your energy going in, that can put you in a state of REDS.
And I feel like this is there's a very fine line between, obviously, cycling, you want to be lean, you want to eat less, but you also want to train really hard. Is it quite common that female cyclists have this?
It's common in a lot of sports.
Is it all over?
In all, it's across all sports. Endurance sports are definitely higher risk, just with the high energy outputs. So for example, more in if we're thinking endurance cycling, that would be quite a high risk. Triathlons, really high risk. That we just see a lot of athletes. And again, we start seeing things like stress fractures. Swimming's another one, that we see loads of illness in. So there are other signs, but I suppose tracking and having that check-in is kind of what we kind of see. But rather than, I suppose, waiting to know if you're at risk, it's actually increasing the education around what energy demands do I need, what is my fueling, what is my energy intake, to avoid having to think about that and that line.
The week before a period, I am starving. I'll just eat anything and everything. Is that placebo? Is that because I'm burning more calories?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on actually. Your metabolism changes in the luteal phase. So if I put it really this is very basic in terms of skipping over some of the details, but in the follicular phase, you predominantly use kind of glycogen and glucose as your energy source. So that's why high intensity training sessions feel quite easy, and why that's where that's come from in terms of promoting that training there. And then when you shift after ovulation, it goes into much more as a fat as your kind of predominant fuel source, which is a lot slower. So it feels like endurance generally should feel easier because it's slower releasing, but can last a lot longer. But also in that kind of luteal phase, you also generally have a slightly higher energy demand. So you do need more food. But there's also then the effects of progesterone, which progesterone naturally breaks down muscle. So if you're doing loads of exercise and your muscles are trying to repair, you're also trying to counteract what's going on with progesterone. So again, like from a nutrition perspective, your body potentially feels like it needs more food to try and help manage that kind of natural breakdown and help that muscle repair and recovery.
So do you burn more calories on your period? Like, is that, I've heard someone say that once. I don't know if that's true or not.
There's mixed, like there's some bits of evidence, but I'd actually say more like the week before your period is where you've kind of got more of a slightly increased calorie requirement. I suppose I very much look at it from like a carbohydrate protein perspective of like what fuel do you need, what recovery to like manage, rather than like in a calorie perspective.
And how important is it to track your period and understand it from that point of view?
This might be biased, but I think it's like really empowering, but also really helpful. Like if you don't know what's happening, so many symptoms are really common to what I call life symptoms. Like I feel fatigued, I feel tired. Is that because like I've just got loads going on, or is that because my progesterone's dropping and that's what's making me feel tired? So actually by tracking your menstrual cycle symptoms, you can start working out which ones are hormone related, and therefore when you then need to put those strategies in place. So I think it's like a really useful kind of check-in. But also, even if you don't track symptoms, if you track the length of your cycle, because again, you can check you've got that like 21 to 35 days, that's consistent, you've not got too much variability, because they're all, again, different factors that just highlight hormone health.
And do you think, is an app the best way to do that, or can you just do it, with a calendar on your phone? What is the best way?
I usually say what works for the individual. So like for myself, an app I find super easy. Like it's on my phone, I can just tap in, it syncs with like my training watch, and it just puts it all in one place. Like that works great for me. Whereas for others might still have like a written training diary, or use like, like pen and paper and write it down like that. For me, it's like whatever you're going to stick to. Like if you're only going to use an app for a week, that's not going to be beneficial.
And how long, so a period can range from, I don't know what the range is, like 3 days or something.
3 to 5 days is average.
What if it starts, so I've had some periods where they're like longer and then shorter, and then if they're shorter, does that mean something, or is that like fine?
Yeah, and just to check, you're talking about the time that you're bleeding from.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah. Just to make sure I've got that right.
Yeah. And is that a sign of something?
Yeah,
like, do you need to pick up on
sometimes that can be like signs that maybe you're starting to go towards that like lower energy, or you're maybe stressed.
What, the less days or more days, or either?
Either. It can really, again, vary. And I suppose this is like coming back to the first question around like research and why hasn't research been done. Like essentially you've got like an N of 1. That every person is slightly different in how they respond. So for example, for me, like I know now that if my period starts getting lighter, but also the days between having a period get longer, that's a check-in that I'm stressed. Because
I'm learning so much.
I'm like useless at working out that I'm stressed. Does that make sense? It's only after I come out and I'm like, oh, looking back, I think I was probably a bit stressed then.
I didn't realize how much you can tell about what your body's doing from what comes out of you, basically. It's incredible.
The first time I experienced, so I was due on my period 3 days before the Olympics. Missed it for 3 weeks. No, and I was panicking. But it's because I honestly...
Did it stress?
Yeah, but it's the first time I've ever missed a period. And like, I'm pretty like frequent, and I knew. But I think my body was just so like... gone into like so stress,
protective mode.
And I like it took me ages.
Did you talk to like coaches or doctors about it at the time?
Yeah, but they didn't. I remember I spoke to the doctor, and he was like, "Oh, that's fine. Like you're probably a bit stressed." But then I was like, "This has never happened before," and like I didn't really know what to do. But I felt like I was experiencing the symptoms of it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't bleeding, and I hate when I'm coming on my period. The waiting for the bleeding.
Yeah.
That's how
almost feels worse.
Yeah. I'm like, cool, like it's happened. But the wait, and like, I felt like I was just waiting. And it was like 2 or 3 weeks later. And it was honestly, it's horrendous. But like, that's a sign to show that I was clearly so stressed.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I realized. I was like, oh, my body knows what's going on.
Yeah, it's crazy, like the information you can get from when you actually just pay attention to it, because a lot of the time you can just kind of go with emotions and not not pay attention to it. But when you just start to understand a little bit about what your body's going through, it's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, it is. I think that's why tracking can just sometimes help you just tune into that a little bit more, just to observe some of those kind of changes that are happening.
Yeah.
And I always say to kind of track for 3 cycles before you kind of start looking if there are any patterns, because so much can happen just day to day that influences how you're feeling and different symptoms. But after kind of 3 cycles, you should start being able to see kind of some consistencies.
A reminder that today's show is hosted by Pinarello, and we're lucky enough to be in the Wilmslow store today. And me and Emma actually both love riding at F-Series bikes, don't we, Emma?
We do.
We went on a ride recently together, didn't we?
The cafe ride was really, really fun. And I've actually ridden a lot more on the road since having my new bike. It makes such a difference.
Do you love it?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. The white on the road against the kit is amazing. It's such a dream to ride.
This is your start of you becoming a road rider in the future.
No, guys, don't worry about that. But it does make a huge difference having a nice bike and being able to go out. I think, it definitely makes it more enjoyable. It definitely makes you want to go out because you have this such a nice bike underneath you. And yeah, I do really enjoy it.
Don't just take our word for it. Head to your local Pinarello retailer and check out the whole range for yourself.
Search Pinarello store locator to find your nearest store.
And going back now, you said that you worked with a cyclist that had quite bad bloating and cramp and struggled to get into the position. What kind of advice would you give for someone similar to that is, struggling with that? And how do you kind of make cycling a little bit easier when you're struggling with cramps?
Yeah, and again, I think one thing I mentioned was just if you're an elite athlete, you need to push through that. Whereas definitely if I've got a recreational cyclist, I'm just actually maybe just listen to your body and take a rest. Have a day off and have a rest. But that's not an option as well, at an elite level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it depends on what your goals are and your aims are. But if you have got bloating, tend to think about especially things like nutrition, hydration. Hydration is one that always comes up, that when someone feels bloated, generally, this is a very big generalization, people tend to want to drink less because they feel bloated. But actually staying hydrated reduces the bloating. Interesting. So things again, staying hydrated whilst you're on the bike, thinking about what fuel you're having. So again, if so for some people, caffeine is a real irritant that makes you feel more bloated. Again, it can be a bit of trial and error for different individuals. So that's kind of what I did with the cyclists I work with. It was okay, how are you feeling on this day? What have you had? What have we taken out? What's worked, what's not worked, to try and identify what the kind of go-to is for them. So really, I would definitely say bloating, hydration. Also thinking about kind of flexibility around and just muscle release around lower back, hips and hip flexors, just because of how all of that then you hold a lot of tension, which again can make it feel harder to get into that position when you're bloated. So there's different things that you can try. And then the other thing is really thinking about the potential root cause. So actually, is that because you're having less sleep and you're not feeling as recovered, that's presenting as bloating, as that inflammatory response?
Is there anything that causes a painful period?
Something called prostaglandins.
Oh. That's a big word.
Yep.
Yeah. Also, it's actually
I was are you ready for this?
Okay.
Do I say it? And what is that?
So it's an inflammatory marker in the body. And generally, if people have got higher prostaglandin levels, they're more likely to experience a more severe period pain. That can vary period to period for individuals. So sometimes you might be oh, my period's not so painful this month. And then next time you're why does this hurt so much? And again, it's linked with that kind of inflammatory response in the body, how much it releases prostaglandins. But I also think there's something else going on in terms of the uterus contracting and the muscle contractions, which is why, so otherwise I'm why would heat really help to reduce those cramps?
Yeah, you always get told heat pack.
Heat pack,
Or
for so
bottle.
many people. But what's interesting is I think some people maybe have both of those mechanisms causing period pains, whereas some just have one or the other.
Wow.
Interestingly, is we don't actually know. So in 2025, I've just written an editorial to be we don't actually know what causes period pain and how to help.
So there's nothing that we can do to lessen, I guess, Wow, that big word
Again,
you said.
it's like the thinking around
I can't
that,
remember
like,
what it was.
kind of, prostaglandins.
Yeah.
And again, it's around how do we reduce that more from a lifestyle perspective that could be causing those symptoms to be worse, unless there's an underlying medical condition, which is then obviously more down a medical pathway needing treatment.
I guess the female cycle's taken up so much of. You said you were just going to start it and move on to other topics, and now you're here.
Yeah.
A while later, still doing it. Is there any other topics that interest you? What were the other things that you were going to delve into, maybe?
Yeah.
Apart from
when I started exploring like female athlete health, I was just like, okay, so there's like the menstrual cycle, there's breast health, there's pelvic health, there's hormonal contraceptive use, and I was like, I'll start with menstrual cycle. Once I've wrapped that up, I'll move on to the next one. Naively, that was 7 years ago, and I don't think I'm ever going to wrap up the menstrual cycle research.
Imagine if you never started that with that
I
one.
know.
Would you be onto it now? Would you have never got to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really
Interesting.
exciting. So many more people are now researching in the area compared to when I started. So I think that movement would have happened. I always kind of liken it a bit to mental health. Like it took kind of like 5 years of like mental health being a thing as such to then it being like just normal, embedded. Everyone was feeling confident talking about it. And I think we're kind of on that journey with the menstrual cycle. But where I'm up to now, I'm still like very much researching in the menstrual cycle, but I've started also exploring pelvic health in female athletes because I think there's even less support and less conversation around that.
Should we go down this route?
I mean,
Have we got time?
it's up to you. So in terms of like pelvic health, I think we very much talk around, and it all started actually because a physio I work with was just like, I talked to all of the mums at physio around actually playing netball and how much we leak now that we've all had kids. And she was like, but what I find really interesting as a physio is that's not just after you've had a kid, like athletes are experiencing that because the opposite, their pelvic floor is almost too strong. So we see it a lot in gymnastics, a lot in weightlifting.
I've never heard of anybody speak about it being you always speak about it being too weak, but never too strong.
I know. I've had personal experience of that, and it was
Have
wild.
you?
Yeah. So I
No
went to see a
way.
pelvic floor specialist, and she examined me and helped me understand it, and then basically said that my pelvic floor was too strong. And in my head, I was always like, I needed to squeeze and make it stronger and try and like stop myself from leaking, but ultimately like it was tired and it needed to relax more.
You
But
need a rest day.
yeah, like there is honestly, I honestly had no idea about anything to do with your pelvic floor and how to control it and things like that. So that was a whole new world for me.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I'm kind of on the start of that journey in terms of similar to what I did with the menstrual cycle of talking to female athletes to be like, what are your experiences? Are there any sports this is more prevalent in? Do you know what that means? Like, do you know that actually there's something that you can do if you do leak during exercise? So we're talking about leaking urine. There is actually like, do you know that there's anything that you can do? Because
I bet so many people just don't
so
talk about
many
it.
people,
Just yeah.
I think there's even less spoken about than the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. Because it is a bit, it's not embarrassing at all, but like you are obviously weighing yourself.
Yeah.
But I found really interesting was when I'm due in my period, it's worse.
That's interesting.
Yeah. When I'm due on my period or on my period, I can't control, like, I really have to focus. It's really, because I think
that's a bit of research I can.
Well,
yeah,
I
I
can
don't
do.
even say things like because obviously when you do like your body is kind of preparing, is that right? Like because
Yeah.
not for birth, but like
For pregnancy.
yeah. So like yeah, I don't know, but I really struggle when I'm due on my period.
That's really interesting.
With my pelvic
So that's
floor.
actually one question that we're about. So we're going to start some research in October that essentially looks at female athletes that experience, so we call it stress incontinence. And basically going through like a full assessment, both at rest and during like physical activity. So like lifting heavy weights, what's going on with their pelvic floor muscles, what's going on with the muscles around that. But then also exploring other factors. So one of my questions is like, does that change across the menstrual cycle?
It does.
Just
For me anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, I'll be back in touch. I'm going to be like, right.
Oh man, I'm happy to figure that out.
And yeah, we're going to do kind of like a 8-week assessment with physio, like intervention to see what helps reduce and manage stress incontinence in female athletes. So very much at the start of the journey on that one, and working with like an amazing team of physios that are specialists in that area. I'm kind of more supporting from a, how do we explore this from a research perspective? But yeah,
have you had
quite
any
excited.
advice of what you need to do?
Oh, yeah, I do actually. So before I do any intensive exercise, if that's like squatting or starts that we do, standing starts, I used to always think like brace, like push out. And I used to squat with a belt. I don't anymore. Whereas now I need to like push in and like up. And also,
I'm sat here like,
sorry, yeah.
I think both of us were acting like that.
And to only like do it for like 10%. I used to be like 100% like squeezing everything. And I say now I'm doing 5 reps on the squat, my pelvic floor would be done. So I'd wee myself because there's nothing left to, whereas if you do it a little bit and after each rep, I just felt so much more in control.
So do you think it's made your kind of squatting better, or because you know when you go to squat you're like, right, everything.
Yeah, it's different. I felt weaker.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because like I have no squat belt now and I'm trying to squat like 100 kilos and I felt like, ooh, this is weak because I felt like I didn't have something to hug me or like I wasn't squeezing everything. So it's learning how to like control your body in that sense. But I definitely feel better for it. Like I haven't leaked much since. Like, and
that's
yeah,
good
it's been,
news.
yeah, it's been a game changer. And
that's
like,
really good.
Yeah. So I've just like controlling that, but it's so ironic to me because in my head as a sprinter, I'm like, brace, squeeze, and everyone's like, be tight and like things. I'm like, actually, I just need to relax.
Do you think that's come from like having a male gym coach, or maybe I don't know, is that the way that men would go about bracing and squeezing?
Well, I guess they don't have to. Well, they do have a pelvic. Do men have a? No, they don't have a pelvic floor. They have like something similar, I guess. But like, I guess, yeah, for them, I don't know if they do have this problem. So they're just like brace, and like when you're lifting weights and stuff, you just want to be angry and like get everything out and like basically just like see red. Whereas it's really ironic for me because you have to like calm down, but you're trying to lift this heavy weight.
Yeah, that's
so it's
really
like
weird. Yeah,
it's new and it's something like, honestly, like some of the other girls will stop using a belt now and start squatting without, and like, but it's just it's crazy. We've never spoken about it. Yeah, like.
And it's so common, and that's the thing.
Yeah. Is it something that
so common?
Your other teammates
suffer
with
and
now
like
that
physios are starting to understand it more because it's really like important for us, and they're starting to understand it, and we can like talk about it more, and like, yeah, because ultimately we do need to train it and talk about it and understand. But it's crazy how like this is the first time like it happens for so many people. We just don't talk about it because obviously you're gonna be like, oh, I'm just weed myself. Like who's openly saying that? But it's like I always got to the point where I was like, I can't
not do anything
like
about it.
I was like you have to like change your knickers and stuff, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like I need to sort this out. Like no, but yeah, onwards and upwards.
It's good that it's getting better.
Yeah, it is. And I think historically there's also just like, oh, use some like pads, or here's some like leak-proof knickers, and it's like, well, actually, when
it's what you
it comes
see on
to,
like TV and the adverts.
Yeah, like when it comes to the pelvic floor, there's actually a lot that we can do to prevent that, and so rather than like putting a plaster over it, should we actually like
do something about it?
Do something about that, and there are so many things to do. So actually, I'm really excited to kind of explore that research a little bit alongside
the next chapter.
Yeah.
And you mentioned kind of doing research into breasts and in sport. Has that started?
Not started. There's an amazing team of people like out of Portsmouth University that are doing some incredible research around breast health. So I feel like they're on the case. They've got that covered.
But again, that's like
it's not something I can take on.
So many little, like so many topics that
wouldn't even think about. And it's like, even we spoke a tiny bit about it earlier, but like how important it is to pick the right sports bra. Whereas like I probably just would have gone for the prettiest colour.
I'm still doing that.
And
like a pink sports bra. I've no idea what it's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, like I work in female health, and even I'm just like, how do I, because when it comes to sports bras, like every brand is like got different size guides.
They don't look very supportive, do they, from the outside?
They're like, some are like light, medium and heavy support. Others are just like actual bra sizes. I think it's such a difficult area to navigate.
Yeah.
Like even I'm just like, where do you start? I'm like, that one looks good. We'll go with that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of research being done, but I think it's still just kind of like, actually, helping females navigate what is a good sports bra, I think is a big thing that needs to be done.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah.
So Natalie, if maybe a younger athlete or an athlete in general was listening to this podcast and maybe at this moment in time doesn't have that relationship with their coach to maybe openly talk about their period, what advice would you give them? Or even if it was a coach listening and they want to kind of learn more about the menstrual cycle and talk to their athletes about it, how would they go about that?
I think if I start with the coach first.
Go for it.
Just because in general, I find, especially for talking like younger athletes or actually any age, actually like a coach opening up that conversation is huge.
Definitely.
Like,
yeah.
and it doesn't mean to say that that coach has to go into like full detail and know all of the information, but just enough to be like, actually let me know if your period or your menstrual cycle is affecting you all, and we can chat about how we might manage training. That can be like a massive opening for an athlete to be able to even just acknowledge, to go, okay, if I am struggling, I'm okay to talk about that. It's not something that I've got to hide, or something that I've spoken to so many female athletes who are like, I've just got to suck it up, I've just got to get on with it myself, I've just got to deal with it. Whereas actually that provides an opening that it's okay to talk about. It's not going to affect your selection, it's not going to affect like how like you're perceived in training, because we're really going to take the approach of, actually, let's manage this.
And even if you are talking about it, it doesn't have to be like, if you're not super comfortable talking about it, it doesn't have to be like really in depth. It could just be like, you know, ticking a box in your training plan being like, this means that I'm on my period this week. It could be as simple as that, just to kind of acknowledge.
Like it could exactly just start off with, or like completely, like for some people, the menstrual cycle might not affect them at all, so that they don't have a reason to talk about it. But actually, I think that's really important for a coach to initiate that and open up that conversation. And also for the coach to be confident that they don't need to know all the answers. Like I'm sat here, I do research in this, and I don't know all the answers around the menstrual cycle now. And actually be like, I don't know the answer to that, but I can go away and find out, or let's work this out together. But just generally having that confidence to start the conversation and say the words menstrual cycle and say the word period, rather than calling it all different euphemisms which exist.
Or like the time of the month, or she's bleeding. You're like, it's period.
Yeah. So to just kind of be confident to say those words, I think is really important. The flip side of that is like, I think one of the worst things you could say is like, I don't want to know anything else, or don't tell me about that, or that's too much information.
Worst,
Because straight away for that individual, that's like probably blocked any confidence or comfort to have that conversation again.
Even with anybody in the future as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like that reinforcing this isn't a topic that's supposed to be discussed. So just really trying to shift that narrative around, actually it's a factor that might affect training and might affect performance. So I'm here if you know, we need to talk about it. And that could be starting off saying, should we track actually that you've got a regular period? Like that might be as much as you need to go into from a health and a performance perspective. Let's check you've got a regular period. So that's kind of what I'd say from a coach perspective. And from an athlete, I think trying to, if you don't feel confident having that conversation, try tracking yourself so you get to know your own cycle, and then go to your coach with that information. Just having a bit of that kind of like evidence behind what you're saying can help with the clarity of maybe how you approach it or what you want to talk about in terms of the menstrual cycle. So that might be, every single cycle I've noticed I'm getting stomach cramps and I feel awful in the training session the day before that. And then it gives like a kind of real specific to kind of focus on into like how we might approach that. But I actually really want to ask both of you, like, how would you have started that conversation with your coach?
That's a hard one. I feel like, Emma, you're just very open.
Yeah,
You're just
I'm pretty like, I'll kind of say anything really. And I think I'm so lucky I have that space and the people around me. Like I feel so comfortable in British cycling, in like the women around me, and even like all my male coaches. I'll be like, guys, I'm coming on my period, or if I feel a certain way, I'm kind of like, my period's due. And I keep track of it in my training peaks, so I don't have to tell every individual I'm on the period. Like they can just see. But I think, yeah, it's always kind of been pretty easy for me, which is really nice. I think like the way I've been brought up, like I've been like periods being spoken about hasn't been like a taboo topic. It's kind of just been like, like I've got a sister, which is really easy. My mum was pretty chill, and then going into the elite sport, I knew it was pretty important. So I was like, I'm on my period, or I'm due, or I'm feeling this way because I'm quite in check with my body. But I know for some people it hasn't always been that easy. But yeah, for me, I'm like, I'll just go up to my coach and be like, this is the situation. And he's like, okay. And sometimes we don't really have a solution, or sometimes we just crack on. And if I'm feeling a certain way, like sometimes if my back's a bit sore sometimes in the gym, I kind of understand that we're not necessarily stay away from certain exercises, because I'll crack on, but like just be more aware it's going to be a bit sore, or stretch a bit more. But yeah, that's kind of how I'd approach it. What about you?
Oh, I feel like mine was very different, because I feel like no one spoke about periods for so long for when I was racing, and even like between like my teammates and friends, like no one really spoke about it until like that final sort of year. And it was like my coach at the time, Brian, that kind of after your workshop kind of started that conversation. I'm really thankful that he did. But I think I would probably approach it as in kind of beat around the bush. I'd be like, oh, I'm not feeling too great, really? Sort of thing. But I wish I was more confident in just kind of saying it out loud. But
do you feel like now you would? Or even now, would you still?
No, I think now,
okay.
I feel like as well, just obviously when I was a bit younger and didn't quite understand it as much as I do now. But yeah, now I'm very confident in, I mean, even just doing a whole podcast and talking about it, I think that's pretty open. But yeah, thank you so much, Natalie. We have learned so much today.
Yeah, honestly, I keep talking for,
I know.
like, asking so many questions.
Thank you for inviting me to come and have a chat with you guys.
You.
It's been great having the opportunity to kind of talk around the menstrual cycle and where things are up to, and yeah, still a long way to go, but also definitely. Hopefully starting to make some progress in terms of information and support for female athletes.
Definitely, and hopefully all of our listeners back at home have learnt lots as well today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll see you on the next episode.
Sorry, I
beat the gun.
See you soon.